सारे जहां से अच्छा हिंदुस्तां हमारा, हम बुलबुले हैं इसकी, ये गुलसितां हमारा हमारा, सारे जहां से अच्छा. Namaste and warm greetings of the day to all. The Frank Thakurdas Memorial Lecture is organized annually by La Politique, Department of Political Science, Kirori Mal College, University of Delhi, to commemorate the birth anniversary of our celebrated professor, Professor Frank Thakurdas. I heartily welcome our distinguished guests, Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar and Professor Sinderpal Singh, our principal, Professor Vibha Chauhan, faculty members of Lab Polity, and participants who have joined us today for the panel discussion on reimagining India's role in today's world. Before we begin, I would like to brief the guidelines. All participants are requested to keep themselves on mute until asked to unmute. All questions are to be put in the chat box by mentioning their full name. I also request the participants to kindly switch on their cameras if possible. I now invite our principal, Professor Vibha Chauhan, to address the August gathering.
Thank you very much, Yashasvi. It's my pleasure indeed to be here this morning at this event organized by the Political Science Society, La Politique. Yesterday was the first day of this two-day event, which is a very, very important part of our annual calendar. And it is I'm proud. It is I'm failing in words because I think I am so happy to be here and speak at an event which promises to be extremely enriching and which has speakers who are really very distinguished and which represents the activity from the Political Science Department of the college. On behalf of Kirori Mal College and the Department of Political Science especially, it is my pleasure and my privilege to welcome Ambassador Shri Ashok Sajjanhar ji, former IFS officer, who has the honor of having been the ambassador of India to Sweden, Latvia, and Kazakhstan. Welcome, sir, and thank you very much for sparing your time to be with us this morning. Our second speaker, Professor Sinderpal Singh, Senior Fellow and Coordinator of South Asia Program, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. Thank you, Professor, for being with us. We look forward to listening to you. Very, very warm welcome. I would hand it over to the speakers, but the topic of today's discussion, India's role in the world today, is something which actually arouses some kind of thoughts in minds of everyone. And we can't help it but go back to the past and think of the time when India played a very, very important role in taking the initiative and strengthening the non-aligned movement, which is known to all. India has been an active and influential member in global affairs for more than half a century. It continues to be an important member of several international organizations like the East Asia Summit, WHO, IMF, and G8+5. Besides that, India is also a member state of BRICS, a group of emerging economies, including Brazil, Russia, China, and South Africa. The large number of overseas persons of Indian origin have also been able to consciously as well as unconsciously disseminate the Indian ethos in social, cultural, and political arenas. Closer home, during the last 1 year, we have become aware of several important facts regarding India's role in pharmaceuticals as well as maintaining standards of health around the world. While the Serum Institute of India, for example, has existed since 1966, it is only during the last 1 year, during our confrontation with COVID-19, that we have come to realize that SII is actually the largest manufacturer of vaccine in the world. And it has been a major provider of vaccines and other pharmaceutical products from several and cooperating in several vaccination programs of organizations like WHO and UNICEF. In this context, I cannot resist the temptation of mentioning one more important event happening that happened in the first part of 20th century. When the Indian company Cipla and its pioneer, Mr. Yusuf Hamid, challenged major world powers to deliver low-cost antiretroviral drugs to manage HIV/AIDS in Africa. Many more Africans would have lost their lives if this had not happened. This is history. Our two distinguished panelists today, I'm certain they are going to enlighten us about the current role of India in our contemporary world. Once again, my heartfelt thanks to our two panelists and best wishes to the Department of Political Science, especially the staff advisor, Dr. Rupinder Oberoi, all the teachers, all the students, and especially the participants. Thank you for being there and making this possible.
Thank you, ma'am, for your words of appreciation. I now invite our staff advisor, Dr. Rupinder Oberoi, to carry forward the event.
Namaskar and good morning and very warm welcome to Frank Thakurdas Memorial Lecture Series organized by La Politique, Department of Political Science, Kirori Mal College, University of Delhi. And thanks Principal Ma'am, Professor Vibha Chauhan for gracing the event and being with us this morning and also setting a perfect tone for the panel discussion which will happen now on recalibrating and reimagining the role of India in the current scenario. Frank Thakurdas was indeed an inspirational and legendary professor of the Department of Political Science, and his contribution also in the field of theatre and the dramatic society is well known in the university and also in Bollywood. And we all hope that we can keep up the department to that repute and keep growing and evolving in the synergistic process of learning and teaching. And it's indeed a very, very great privilege and pleasure to have with us Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar ji and Professor Sinderpal Singh ji from Nanyang Technology University, Singapore, to discuss the topic of reimagining India's role in the world. As is being said, that the unipolar moment is over and the multipolarity is a reigning trend in the defining interstate relationships in the 21st century. The world order is rapidly muting and it's marked by tectonic shifts in the power from the west to the east, from north to the south. And the so-called global south is no longer, rhetorical construct, but an all too real hub of economic vibrancy, innovation, enterprise, and can-do spirit. In this context, foreign policy and the branding of a nation is inherently a very, very dynamic process and is often determined by external geopolitical, geostrategic, and geoeconomic hard realities, but it is also an outcome or result of civilizational history, culture, identity, ethnicity, internal social contradictions, and of course, the power politics at play. While there is a growing consensus on the continuing waning of the USA as a unipolar power, and its influence over the world is surely decreasing, China and India, on the other hand, have been marked by many observers as the re-emerging key entities setting the course for the new Asia century. As a rising power, foreign policy makers in India have also had to make the substantial changes in their old style as well as the substance of the policy making in order to cope up with this evolving new realities at the global scale. India's international positioning had long been characterized as strategic autonomy, and the shifting domestic configurations and complexities played out to that. However, with the contours of the new multipolar world polity, rise of the China threat at the border, the checkered past with Pakistan, Indian diplomacy and the foreign policy has taken now a substantial number of sharp U-turns and bold steps forward, particularly in last few years. The popular trend in the international arena over the last decade indicates the emergence of popularity of the elected conservative leadership capable of making these very, very tough and strong or hard decisions and initiating these actions of being very proactive in the international arena. There is some criticism from some quarters about the disappearance of so-called consensus building approaches in democracies. There is also but there is no indication, which I can particularly talk about, of the waning of the popular support for this kind of effective and strong leadership as we enter into the era of muscular political leaders who symbolize a renewed focus on nationalism and populism. Overall, the new discernible trend is towards autarky and nationalism. So the current phase is also characterized by this hardcore, realistic approach or school of thought in international relations. In India, particularly with the landmark victory of BJP in 2014 elections and the subsequent repeat in 2019, Indian politics under the Prime Minister Modi envisaged the new India with Make in India and now Atmanirbhar Bharat, Skill India, Smart Cities, Digital India. All these projects signaled a move away from the reactive state building projects towards a more opulent, optimistic drive towards modernization, confidence, self-reliance, self-assurance, and the achievement of international respect and legitimacy. Today, the global order is far too different from what it was, say, 50 years back, and also about a decade back. And the India of 2021 has the aspiration of becoming a key global player with the ability to project the cloud far beyond the borders. Through the wider global engagement and engagement also with the immediate neighborhoods, India is aiming to be the rule maker rather than being merely rule taker. India also has this 20 million strong diaspora community abroad, spread all over the world. And one of the major aim of Modi government has been to engage them and drive maximum benefit from their presence abroad and build this brand India globally. So as a part of the ideational restructuring of India, what is urgently required, apart from competent statescraftsmanship, is an adoption of prudent policy, pursuit of very realistic, achievable objectives, and above all, the demonstration of continuity of the policy, irrespective of the changes in the nature of the administration. So as India looks ahead in 2021, as External Affairs Minister, S. Jaishankar, in his book, The India Way, Strategizing for the Uncertain World, sums up the Indian foreign policy goal in this age of disruption as, and I quote here, many friends, few foes, great goodwill, more influence, that must be achieved through the Indian way, I unquote here. So to discuss and decode this new brand India, to understand what are some of these basic and long-term drivers of New India, what is the India's strategy to achieve these goals and targets? What should India be doing? We are indeed privileged to have among us Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar ji and Dr. Sinderpal Singh ji. I'll begin the panel discussion with a brief introduction of Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar ji, and he will give his presentation, and then we will move on to Professor Sinderpal ji. So I'm introducing Ambassador Sajjanhar ji. He has a high profile, and he was kind enough to accept the invitation to be with us. And as Principal Ma'am introduced, Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar ji has worked in Indian Foreign Service for over 3 decades. He was an ambassador of India to Kazakhstan, Sweden, Latvia, and has worked in the diplomatic positions in Washington, DC, Brussels, Moscow, Geneva, Tehran, Dhaka, and Bangkok. He negotiated for India in the Uruguay round of multilateral trade negotiations for India-EU, India-ASEAN, and India-Thailand free trade agreements. He's worked as a head of the National Foundation for Communal Harmony. He's currently a president of Institute of Global Studies in New Delhi. So Ambassador Sajjanhar ji writes and speaks on multiple issues, particularly relating to international relations and Indian foreign policy. And now I cordially invite Ambassador Sajjanhar ji to share his thoughts on this topic. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Oberoi, for this very generous and gracious introduction. Also, let me very warmly thank you, La Politique, the leadership of La Politique, and also, of course, the principal, Madam Vibha Chauhan, for organizing this Frank Thakurdas Memorial Lecture and inviting me to share my thoughts. I must say that, when I was going through the biography of Dr. Frank Thakurdas, I realized that when he was in Kirori Mal College, I used to be in Delhi University in another college nearby. And from there, we used to walk often through the lawns and corridors of KMC to get to Kamla Nagar. So although I didn't have the pleasure and the opportunity and the privilege of knowing Dr. Frank Thakurdas, but I'm sure that we have walked through the same corridors many, many decades ago. And I'm so very happy to be speaking at an event to mark his contribution to political science and also to theater and to dramatics in KMC and also, of course, Delhi University. I would also like to thank and congratulate the organizers for selecting this subject of India's position in the very rapidly transforming world, because all of us are aware, and Dr. Oberoi, you have spoken, Madam Principal has spoken very evocatively about what are the changes that are taking place in the world. And of course, the world is changing rapidly. India is also changing rapidly. So it is appropriate that we consider how India finds itself in the churn that is taking place in the world. Now I see that I have been given about 20 minutes to share my thoughts. Of course, later we'll have the possibility to have a question answer session. So what I'm going to do is possibly spend a few minutes to delineate what are some of the changes that I see happening in the world. Of course, change is the order of things. It is given, as they say, the only permanent thing or the only permanent thing is change. So change always keeps happening, but the rapidity with which it is taking place is not only not a once in a lifetime experience, but in a once in a century experience. And today is a time of great flux. The world is witnessing tensions and turmoil on a scale that has not been seen, that has not been witnessed in recent history. Of course, the most important is what has been mentioned by Madam Principal also, is the pandemic that has been ravaging the world for more than a year. It has affected not only the health of most people in more than 190 countries in the world, but also the economies of most of these countries, and also resulted in huge social tensions around the world. I think the last event of this nature that was witnessed in the world was about a century ago, the Spanish flu in 2018 or so. Some of the changes that have been taking place before the pandemic, the most obvious that comes to mind is the rise of China. We see that in 2008, possibly that could be identified as the watershed when China's assertiveness started growing. That was also the time of the major international economic crisis. It was also the time when China organized the Olympics in Beijing. 2009, we witnessed once again the redrawing of what is known as the 9-dash line in the South China Sea, thereby China signaling that it was claiming more than 90% of the South China Sea as its own territory, as its own water body. After that, we witnessed 2013, the launch, so to say, of the Belt and Road Initiative, what was known as the One Belt, One Road, later rechristened as the Belt and Road Initiative. In 2016, we witnessed the verdict of the Permanent Court of Arbitration on the South China Sea, where the PCA completely rejects all the claims by China to for all the water territory, water body under the 9-dash line. However, that does not really result in any change as far as Chinese position is concerned. It continues to occupy more of the islands. It continues to construct and create more artificial islands in the South China Sea. It continues to militarize all these islands. And then, of course, we have 2019, the onset of the pandemic of the coronavirus and the COVID-19 crisis. And that, of course, sees the assertiveness of China changing into much greater aggressive and belligerent behavior. We in India have witnessed it. We had signed agreements with China from 1993 as to how to maintain peace and tranquility on the border. But all those agreements are set aside, and we have the amassing of troops on our border, 50,000 troops with several thousands of tanks, several thousands of aircraft, and also a skirmish taking place in June in the Galwan Valley, in which India loses 20 of its brave soldiers and an unknown number of soldiers as far as China is concerned. Why China has done that, no one has really been able to say. China itself has not shared. Even the External Affairs Minister, to which Dr. Oberoi referred, he has also said that we have really not been able to find. I have my own views on that. One of those I could share with you, and we could have a discussion if there is interest in the question answer session. I think China looked upon this as a strategic opportunity, in my view, when it saw that all the nations of the world are busy dealing with the pandemic. Their economies have got shattered, and China, because of the fact that it has been able to contain the virus and its economy was not so severely impacted upon, thought that this was a good opportunity, strategic opportunity in which it could try to score a strategic victory over over India. it was still smarting under the humiliation that it had experienced in 2017 in Doklam. But then it got a pushback, and possibly it did not expect that this would be the response from India. But that notwithstanding, it has tried to be aggressive and do muscle flexing in South China Sea against Vietnam, against Philippines, against Malaysia, and threatening the security of Taiwan, of Japan in the East China Sea, and in its own territory, whether it is Xinjiang, East Turkestan, or Hong Kong, or the other areas. So this is one aspect that has been prominent. The other is the relative decline of the United States, which again started from 2014, 2008, when the international economic crisis took place. As far as President Obama was concerned, for the next 8 years from 2009 onwards, he wanted Chinese cooperation on climate change, and that is why the activities of China in the South China Sea were left quite unchecked. Trump started a pushback on trade, on intellectual property rights, on technology, forced transfers from US companies. But I think it needs also to be understood that this was much more than just a trade and technology battle. It was a battle for supremacy, for the hegemony as far as the world is concerned. And I think the recent meeting and the spat that we saw between Antony Blinken and Jake Sullivan with their counterparts Yang Shiji and Wang Yi in Anchorage, I think this was a demonstration of that. Then the third aspect of change, what we can see is increased cooperation between Russia and China started in 2014 when Crimea, a referendum took place in Crimea, and the problems in Ukraine took place. And so that has resulted in a much greater strategic bonding between Russia and China. These were two totally uncompromising adversaries in the last century, but right now they have come together because the United States has emerged as a common enemy. There is also the rise, I think this period can also be identified with the rise of the Quad and the Indo-Pacific in 2017. I think all the participants here are aware that Quad started in 2004 with the tsunami. 2007, the first meeting amongst these four countries took place at senior official level, but then again, it got a revival in 2017. And this has resulted in the first summit level meeting also taking place just earlier this month. Also, Dr. Oberoi referred to the movement of the center of gravity from the transatlantic region to the Asian region. And that really refers not only to China, not only to India, but a large number of other economies also, whether it is Korea, whether it is Vietnam, whether it is Indonesia. So basically, there is this movement. The last points on this aspect, what I would mention is decline of multilateralism, and that has been visible much during the period of the pandemic, because for the first few months, even the UN Security Council could not meet to discuss this pandemic and how to deal with it. Even when it met, it was not really able to take any fruitful or concrete decisions as to how to move forward. And the last aspect in this is also the decline of globalization, which had been taking place earlier also. We had witnessed the pushback against globalization. But then during the pandemic, we have seen how vaccine nationalism has emerged. Countries which are already have huge quantities of vaccines, they still don't want to export them. They don't want to share them. I think one remarkable exception is India, and I'll come to that briefly. So let me now come to the issue of how India reimagines its position in the world. First, I'm sure all are aware, India is the second largest in population. It is the largest democracy. It is the third largest economy in terms of the purchasing power parity. As far as maybe the normal dollar levels are concerned, it would be the fifth or the sixth largest economy. But in purchasing power parity, it is about $12 trillion, with the United States about 23, and China being about 26 or $27 trillion. It is an active participant in UN peacekeeping system. It is a country with the largest, one of the largest diversity in language, in religion, in culture, customs. It has also handled this crisis most creditably and most admirably. It is emerged as a factor of security, a factor of stability, peace, and in the region as well as the world. And it wants to play a role in international affairs with its population. A developing country that is prepared to share its modest resources with those countries that need this. As said when he was talking to the UN Assembly last year, when Prime Minister Modi was speaking at the UN General Assembly session last year in a virtual format, he had announced that India would be coming out with its vaccines. And while helping its own people, the vaccines would also be made available to help the humanity and the world. And this is exactly what India has done, while many countries in the world which are supposed to be internationalist and much more globalized in their outlook and in their approach. And India at times is mentioned as the Indian government is mentioned as a nationalist government. India has supplied these vaccines to more than 70 countries in the world, and to several of them in a form of grant, particularly those countries which are in its neighborhood and which need these vaccines. For instance, I'm sure several of us here are aware that India started its own vaccination program on the 16th of December, but within 4 days, India has supplied vaccines to Bhutan and Maldives on the 20th of January. On 21st January, we supplied 2 million vaccines to Bangladesh, 1.5 million vaccines to Nepal, and so on and so forth. So far, more than 60 million vaccines to about 70 countries. And many of them have been supplied, as I said, as grant rather than on a commercial basis. So it is let me very quickly, the time that is still about 8-9 minutes, some of the priorities about the Indian government. The first would be the emphasis on neighborhood. The government that the current government has made. I think it was speaking at the UN General Assembly in September 2014, just after coming power, that Prime Minister Modi said a stable and peaceful environment for its development is required. So first, what I was focusing on as the priority that the government had taken was the neighborhood policy. And I could give several examples as to how this has been taken forward. For instance, when the Prime Minister said that a nation's destiny is linked to its neighborhood, so the focus has been over the last 6.5, 7 years on improving relations with the neighborhood. And I think that has really given positive results. I think in some of the action we can see Prime Minister selected Bhutan to be the first country of his visit in 2014. Bhutan is a small country. We have excellent relations. But I think the wisdom of this choice was amply demonstrated when in 2017 we had the Doklam crisis, which went on for 73 days. After he was inaugurated for the second time in 2019, he selected Maldives, again small country in our neighborhood, as his first country of visit. Before that, he had invited all leaders of SAARC countries to his inauguration in 2014 on the 26th of May. Again, sending out a very clear message that India wants to have strong relations with its neighbors. And for 2019, he invited all leaders of BIMSTEC countries, again, all neighboring countries. But in this, Pakistan was excluded because of all the terrorist activities by Pakistan, and Myanmar had been included. So, some of the comments that the Prime Minister made when he visited Bhutan for the first time, he said that a strong, stable, and prosperous India is in the interest of its neighbors. When he visited Sri Lanka in March 2015, he said that the first claim on India's growth and development and prosperity should be its neighbors. And this is the policy that has been followed, whether it is in terms of loans, it is in terms of grants, it is in terms of lines of credit, it is in terms of connectivity projects, it is in terms of people-to-people contacts, it is in terms of pipelines or railway connections or road connectivity across the board, whether it is Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan. I think over the last 6.5 years, neighborhood has assumed a very important role. Bangladesh has really emerged as the role model as far as bilateral ties are concerned. Some analysts and commentators would seem to suggest that it is because China is making forays in this region that India has been acting. But I think India has been acting in terms of not seeing what China is doing, but focusing on its own strengths in this region. And these strengths are huge. Tomorrow, the Prime Minister will be traveling to Bangladesh to mark the 50th anniversary of Bangladesh's liberation. And this has also his first visit in 2015, when he had gone after getting a unanimous consent from the Parliament on the land boundary agreement, which had been hanging fire since 1975. I think this very adequately and very convincingly demonstrates the interest of the government to have strong and equal relations with the neighborhood. The second aspect that I would mention is in terms of the huge impetus that has been provided to India's relations with the United States. It has been a global multi-sectoral strategic partnership. It is based on shared values and interests. Relations have been growing, have been expanding since 2000, since the visit of Bill Clinton to India in March 2000. But the impetus that it received from 2014 onwards has been quite remarkable, because there is not only a convergence of values, both the countries are democracies, but also shared interests as far as the two countries are concerned. As far when there was a 4-year tenure of President Trump, there was very many misgivings whether the same upward trajectory would continue. In fact, it got even further strengthened, and we saw that the Indo-Pacific, the concept of Indo-Pacific and of the Quad were launched, and they were taken forward. And I don't have the slightest doubt that during the tenure of President Biden, this relationship would strengthen. The convergence of interests is Both India needs technology, India needs capital. The United States needs the big market as far as India is concerned, the huge manpower, the huge manufacturing capabilities that India has to offer, and of course, a common hostile adversary as far as China is concerned. The third aspect I would underline, in which India is reimagining and reprojecting its role, is relations with the Gulf, with West Asia. That region has always been important. 8 million of Indian diaspora, our energy dependence, trade dependence, huge remittances coming from there, the investment, but this has now been transformed into a strategic partnership. Prime Minister Modi, in recognition of his contribution to strengthening these relations, has been awarded the highest awards by all countries in the region, whether it is Saudi Arabia, it is UAE, Bahrain, Oman, Qatar, Kuwait, all of them. And that signifies to the dynamism and to the strength of the partnership. The other aspect I would mention is Act East policy, where India has moved beyond a purely commercial and a trade economic relationship to much more strategic content as far as these ties are concerned. With ASEAN, the northeast of India, the northeastern states of India have sought to be made integral elements of the Act East policy. Our individual bilateral relations with Japan, with Australia, with the Republic of Korea, with so the geographical coverage has increased and the substantive content has also gone up. The last aspect here I would mention, of course, there are so many things that one can be stated, but I can see that I have already overshot the time by a few minutes. So I'll try to conclude quickly, is in terms of projecting the cultural aspects of Indian thought and Indian philosophy. It was started with the call to have an International Day of Yoga, when Prime Minister Modi spoke on at the UNGA in September 2014. More than 175 countries supported India's call, and 21st of June every year has been recognized as the International Day of Yoga. Even during the time of the pandemic, Prime Minister has come up with the focus on India's traditional medicine to build up resilience and sustenance against the pandemic. And that has also been accepted and acknowledged by the world. Prime Minister has spoken about the Indian ethos and philosophy on the challenges. One is, of course, relationship with China, to which I alluded, whether it is how do we respond to it, of course, in terms of maintaining our defenses on the borders on 3,480. But very quickly, so our relations, the challenge that we face from China from across the border. So one, we have to build up the infrastructure as far as the border areas are concerned, maintain our military presence there. But in addition to that, it has to be all of the government approach in terms of the economic pushback, as far as the maritime area is concerned, as far as strengthening our relations with our neighboring countries, with other countries. We have seen how the Quad meeting has taken place, although virtually. It was decided that in person also this meeting will take place later this year. How the concept of Indo-Pacific is being worked out. Even in Quad, we work on vaccines, we work on climate change, we work on emergent technologies. So I think this cooperation, particularly amongst the democracies of the world, needs to be brought up. The second challenge, I would say, is maintaining our relations with Russia. Russia has always been a close, reliable strategic partner. But Russia's growing proximity and growing strategic partnership with China, that could create some difficulties for India. Although India is quite clear that it wants a strong, India has what is called a special and a privileged strategic partnership with Russia. It wants to maintain that. And that is why it has also ordered the S-400, notwithstanding the threat of sanctions from the United States is concerned. But we have to see, last year was the first time in 20 years that India and Russia did not have a summit meeting, although from 2001 onwards, they have been, every year regularly, these summit meetings have taken place. And the last aspect is in terms of India's economic growth. Dr. Oberoi referred to the Atmanirbharta and all the other initiatives. India decided in November 2019 not to become a part of the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and it wants to focus on its Atmanirbharta. Atmanirbharta is not to be taken as constructing barriers and tariff walls around it, but to strengthen ourselves so that we can engage with the outside world in a much more confident manner. So I think that is going to be also a challenge. We are possibilities of entering into a mini trade deal with the United States, on which discussions have been going on for some time, on entering into a mini trade deal, pluck the low-hanging fruit with the European Union. The meeting between Prime Minister Modi and the leadership of European countries takes place on the 8th of May in Porto, Portugal. And this is an important element of the bilateral discussions. So let me end here to say that there are a number of initiatives that have been taken so that India can play its suitable role as far as the global stage is concerned. It has been moving forward in that direction. Of course, there are a number of challenges, but in this fast changing world, India looks forward to the future with hope and with confidence. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sajjanhar ji, for providing this very brilliant.
Very nice. Thank you. Namaskar. Wonderful. Sorry, please continue.
Yeah, thank you very much. And for providing this very brilliant and succinct presentation on India's role in the shifting world order and the power reconfiguration which is taking place. And you painted this macro representation and picture of international relations between major powers of the world in the era of declining multilateralism. And you actually, in a way, summed up the syllabus of the political science honors, international relations paper, and Indian foreign policy paper in good about 20 minutes. So thank you for doing that, And, it was a very, very nice presentation. And I think you mentioned and, sort of raised some of the critical issues, both challenges and the positive side and the dynamic nature of the Indian foreign policy that we are engaging with at the international level. I'm sure there will be many, many questions, and we'll take that towards the end of the session. And now I would like to invite our next guest speaker, that is Dr. Sinderpal Singh, who is a senior fellow and coordinator in the South Asia program at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, Nanyang Technology University, Singapore. His research interest includes international relations in South Asia, with special focus on Indian foreign policy. And before joining RSIS, Sinderpal Singh was a senior research fellow at the Institute of South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore, and a postdoctoral research fellow at the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, National University of Singapore. He's published widely on the topics related to Indian foreign policy and the geopolitics of the Indian Ocean region. So I invite you kindly, Professor Sinderpal Singh, to share your views on this topic with all of us. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Oberoi. Firstly, let me say thanks to you for firstly reaching out to me, and thanks for inviting me to be part of this program. I had to do a bit of research on the history of the person in whose name this memorial lecture is done. So, a very interesting person. So, and also. I also want to send my greeting from Singapore. Obviously, I mean, the time of COVID, it's quite strange that we have to converse over Zoom like that. I used to come to Delhi about 3 to 4 times a year for work, and it's been a year, so it's nice to see people in Delhi. So, firstly, again, thank you very much for inviting me over. Let me just put out a couple of qualifications first, and then maybe I can quickly go through what I want to say. I won't take 20 minutes. I think I'll take about 15 or so. Firstly, I want to qualify. Whatever I say are my personal views. They're not the views of my university, my school, and obviously not my country, even though I'm a Singaporean citizen. So let's put it out there straight, because this might be recorded and then someone might say something. So that's fun. Number two, I think, of course, Ambassador Sajjanhar has given an amazing overview as someone who has been at the forefront of Indian foreign policy for so long. So I think what the value that I can bring is to look at the topic from the outside, so to speak, because I sit in Singapore, and so maybe that might provide a good foil to what Ambassador Sajjanhar has outlined. Basically, I think 3 broad points to make. The first is, I think, to provide, when you talk about India's role in the world, the first point, of course, is for academics like me who always look for patterns where sometimes there are none. The first is like kind of broad, outlook about how the Indian state has positioned itself in the world since independence in 1947. The second part, probably, I just want to quickly look at how, since 2014, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi has come to power, how the Indian state has either carried on what it was doing before or changed that. And the third part, in a sense, speaks to the last part of Ambassador Sajjanhar's talk, which is about how from the outside India, what are the kind of trends that the analysts see in the near term when it comes to India? What are the kinds of problems or potential areas that people see when they are from outside India? So let me start with the first part, which is, I think, a kind of broad sweep of how India has seen its role in global politics. And I think most people, or at least some people, will see three kind of phases of Indian foreign, or 3 kind of phases when it comes to India's role in global politics. I think the first, of course, is from the period of 47 right through, I think, to about 1962, where you have a prime minister who takes an overwhelming amount of interest in India's external relations, so much so that he's prime minister and an external affairs minister as well, Prime Minister Nehru. And at that point, I think Prime Minister Nehru envisioned India to play a leading role in global politics, largely because of its size. Number two, because of the manner in which it overthrew imperial rule. And number 3, because of its civilizational contributions to global history and knowledge writ large. And I think that's the kind of starting point about the kind of Indian internationalist moment from about 47 onwards. But however, I think at that point, of course, as most people will know, Nehru's kind of vision for India was very different from what was going on as the Cold War was developing. And the vision of India was a country that would not take part in great power politics, would play a moral role. Of course, down the road, I think some of these, it can be argued that some of these positions may have hurt India strategic interests down the road, but there was the kind of, I guess, the kind of vision that from 47 right to 62, I say 62 because I think the border war with China and kind of China's not declaration of victory, but I think for most outsiders, the 62 war ended in a Chinese victory, sort of put a dampener on what Nehru saw as his vision for India. And then from after his death, you have a transition period. And I think a lot of people see the second period roughly from about the early 70s with the liberation of Bangladesh. And this second period is a very strange period where actually, while India's relative power in South Asia grows largely because of the liberation of Bangladesh, India actually starts to become less international. And in the second phase, I think what happens is that Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, a woman who felt domestically very insecure about her power, also felt that India's general geopolitical position in the world in the 70s wasn't the best, especially after the Americans and the Chinese had arrived at an understanding, which again robbed India of the playing of China with the US. And I think what happens then in from the 70s onwards until about 1984 is that the Indian state sort of retreats from its global role, but also tells the world to stay out of South Asia, right? So we won't disturb anyone largely, or no one should come to South Asia and do anything. So you got then the starting point of the IPKF that happens in the late 1980s. But again, you got the second phase where India becomes less international. Its vision of the world, the role is that it's a regional power in South Asia, and nobody else should come to South Asia and get involved. If anything needs to be done in South Asia, the Indian state should do it. And then you got the third stage, I think, and then you got transition stage between the death of Madam Indira Gandhi. And then I think the third phase is the early 1990s, where the main change is happening in the international system, of course. And by the early 1990s, things don't look very good for India because first, the dissolution of the Soviet Union, which sort of robs India of one of its, closest friends. India's strategic options then start to narrow. The Gulf War didn't help India as well. Oil prices go up. Of course, we all know about the balance of payment crisis. And then in steps this man in the early 90s, Finance Minister Manmohan Singh, who then starts to liberalize India's economy. I think that's the third phase. The third phase then is a reopening of India to the world again, right? So India now is a more confident country willing to embrace the world. But unlike the first phase, which was infused by, kind of Nehru's idea of Fabian socialism, worries about how capitalism was an evil system, etc. The third phase, you see India then embracing this global capitalist system, the global trading regimes, etc. Still with some hesitations in certain areas, but opening up again. India is again becoming internationalist in that sense. So you get that period that starts from about the early 1990s, and this also is where India starts talking about looking east, because supposedly has neglected its relations on the eastern side, which basically Southeast Asia, East Asia, etc. So this is I guess, the kind of broad three phases of India from 1947. So you got an internationalist moment, then you have a moment where India retreats to its neighborhood, and then India comes out again, becoming trying to engage the world once again. The second part of my presentation concerns the period from 2014 when Prime Minister Narendra Modi comes to power. On some level, it's a continuation of what's been happening since the early 1990s, which was opening up to the world, trying to figure out a new relationship with the United States now that the Soviet Union was gone, and how the relationship has improved since the early 1990s. And in a sense, from 2014 onwards, the BJP government carries on that trend. So that's, in a sense, one of the continuities in Indian foreign policy from 2014 onwards. But I think there were other areas where things were done which showed some amount of discontinuity. One was actually, I think, the Middle East. Now, the Middle East has always been kind of India's, it's a very complex problem for Indian foreign policy, largely because Pakistan has continuously used the Organization of Islamic Countries to get on its side when it comes to issues like Kashmir. So India has constantly tried to be on the right side of countries in in the Middle East. But this always presented India with another problem, which is relations with Israel. Israel has been one of the largest supporters of India for a long, long time. But the problem for the Indian government was that seemed to be a zero-sum game. If you get too close to Israel, then the Middle East countries, the Arab countries will not like it very much. But I think from 2014 onwards, Modi's foreign policy in the Middle East has been actually quite very successful, very complex, but also very skillful in the sense that he's developed very strong ties with Israel, and it's public, not like before, publicly strong ties. But at the same time, he has developed very strong ties with other Middle Eastern countries as well. I mean, so like just like Bahrain, UAE, for example. And I think I think the Indian state was slightly ahead of the curve, largely because I think they saw Israel, Saudi Arabia, and a couple of other Arab countries actually coalescing into a loose coalition where they saw the main threat as being Iran. Now, India-Iran relation, that's a slightly separate issue, and that's India's got other complications there. But I think in that sense, from 2014 onwards, in the Middle East, for example, that has been, I think, one of the achievements of the Modi government's foreign policy since 2014. I think the second improvement from 2014 was the look east to act east, right? So don't only look, you're supposed to act as well. And I think on that level, I think the BJP government from 2014 has really enhanced relations with Southeast Asia, this part of the world. And I think a large part of that was that India became less afraid to talk about military cooperation, military capability in this part of the world, through the Straits of Malacca, right all the way down to the South China Sea, our old relations with Vietnam. The Indian state was, less hesitant to say, I think the Indian Navy should have a more visible role through the Straits of Malacca, for example. We should join the Malacca Straits Patrol, for example. So I think that was a kind of like significant change you see from 2014 onwards. So on one level, a lot of continuity, but also quite a bit of change in largely positive way. And when you look at those two areas, the Middle East and East, and Southeast Asia, East Asia. Now, the third part of what I wanted to say, the third part concerns what are the kind of trends, problems, potentials that people from outside India see when they see Indian foreign policy. I think the first is, and I don't mean to, I hope no one gets upset, but Ambassador Sajjanhar said that Atma Nirbhar is not putting up trade barriers. It doesn't look like that from the outside. It looks like a return to the kind of discourse that used to happen in India in the 50s and the 60s. Self-resilience, self-sufficiency, and I think in a sense that makes countries outside India, especially East Asia, a bit uneasy, because the idea was that India had turned the corner. It had come to the early 1990s, has liberalized its economy, wanted to embrace the global trading system. And now when you hear the discourse of self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and then in tandem with that, pulling out from RCEP, all those things together give an indication, at least to people on the outside, that there is a movement back, that the open India embracing the world is taking a small little step back. I may be wrong, but I'm just sharing the impression from people on the outside. So that's one trend that I think you see going into the future. And the fact that Ambassador Sajjanhar said that globalization is dead, I think in a sense reflects what people think people in India think at this moment. Right? So that's a reflection in the sense of the discourse within India that, Trump was right, economic nationalism is not a bad thing, and globalization is dead. Right? Not everybody agrees with that. In fact, I think countries in East Asia do not think that globalization is dead. In fact, countries in East Asia think globalization should be pursued much more deeply. Thus, the RCEP is something that I think countries in this part of the world have already agreed to. They're going to start implementing it. That's one. Number two is looking on the outside. I think Minister Jaishankar, just a small trivial note of trivia. Dr. Jaishankar was India's High Commissioner to Singapore at one point. So we all know him quite well down here. And he always came across as one of the smartest minds that you see in the room. So I think for a lot of analysts, I think China policy, since Dr. Jaishankar was Foreign Secretary and now Foreign Minister, you get the sense that much of the India's China policy has been not really framed, but I think influenced by Jaishankar's kind of outlook on the world. And I think if you want to really distill what I think is the kind of Jaishankar approach, I think the Jaishankar approach largely was that you should have a frank conversation with China earlier on and admit that China is your competitor, that China and India will compete in all the different domains, diplomatic, political, military, economic. And as I said, the idea was you should not try to wish that away. And it should not be about, oh, India-China differences are due to differences in interpretations or misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding. India and China are competitors. So people who go on the radio and say, no, sir, if they just talk to each other, they'll be fine. No, they have different interests and their interests collide with each other. I think the Jaishankar idea was, while we can acknowledge that, why can't we have a great power compact? These are two rising powers. Can we come to an understanding where we agree that we are going to compete, but we make sure that we don't come to a point where we have open conflict between ourselves? Can we construct an understanding along those lines? And I think Prime Minister Modi since 2014 has tried really hard, I think, to build that compact with China. I think the last few months have shown that, and as Ambassador Sajjanhar was saying, for reasons I think very best known to the Chinese don't seem to want that compact, at least not at this point in time. So in the absence of that compact, of that understanding, I think increasingly India has little choice but to build a stronger relationship with the United States. I mean, it's not rocket science, right? So that's going to happen. Now, while from the outside, from countries in East Asia, that seems it's not a bad development. Country East Asia now get slightly worried about the fact that India seems to value mechanisms like the Quad much more than the other mechanisms which are ASEAN-led. For example, the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting, ADMM Plus, the East Asian Summit and all the associated mechanisms that come with that. There is a sense in East Asia that India has lost some interest in ASEAN-led mechanisms. And this might come from the feeling that those ASEAN-led mechanisms have not been able to curtail Chinese behavior. And the only way to curtail Chinese behavior is to openly balance against China, which is to join a mechanism like Quad, which excludes China, because enough of including China within the ASEAN-led mechanisms, that hasn't helped them at all. So now that is the worrying part from people from the outside. Of course, I understand that every country pursues its own national interest, but I think from the outside looking at that, that seems to, for East Asian countries, to be a negative development, largely because it looks like India is basically done with the ASEAN-led kind of mechanisms. So I think that's the kind of the second kind of trend that, when seen from the outside, seems to be somewhat disturbing. I think I leave it there. I think I just enough time. I leave it there, and then maybe if there's enough time for Q&A, we can have a discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sinderpal ji, for providing this historical, background about the Indian foreign policy, beginning with Nehru to Indira Gandhi and the 1990s era, and currently, how do you understand, particularly the Modi regime and Modi's particular foreign policy. And you also sort of raised certain critical issues about how India looks from the East and from the outside. And that's an interesting perspective, because most of us in India actually celebrate Atmanirbhar policy as self-sufficiency, and we don't really see it as a contradiction to globalization and global integration. We want what we say it's a kind of boost and kind of a provision to Indian entrepreneurial spirit, to allow the innovation, allow the kickstart of those medium and small and micro enterprises to find a space within India to flourish within the Indian space. So in a way, we don't see actually this kind of a contradiction between liberalization, privatization, and globalization, and the Indian need to sort of showcase India also as a space of innovative economy, entrepreneurial economy. So, but it was interesting take, and it was something new that I heard about, from your point of view, and also your admission to the fact that how long can we continue to think of China as a friend? How long we can assume that some kind of bilateral talking between China will allow this kind of skirmishes and distrust or miscommunication to evaporate. And I firmly agree with you, Professor, on that it's high time that we see and also admit that China is a competitor. And with that standpoint, perhaps our engagement with China would also shift. So these are the realities of the international landscape that we are existing in. And South Asia and the focus of the world is economically, geopolitically, geostrategically is on Asia now. We are seeing the Brexit, the implications of that. We're seeing the decline of USA. So this is in a way, Asia century as it is touted and spoken about. So a very, very interesting perspective indeed. We would take the question and answer session. I see there are a lot of questions in the chat box. So I think some of the clarity and some of the engagements and some of the points that you raised would get further elucidated and explained as we take some questions. So kindly take on the questions, please.
All right. So I see a good number of questions in the chat box. I request Simrit Arora to kindly unmute herself and ask a question.
Thank you, Yashasvi. Thank you so much, the guest speakers, for such an insightful session. My question is, do you think that the long sustained image of India as a leader of oppressed and marginalized nations has disappeared on account of its newfound role in the emerging global order?
To whom your question is intended to?
Either can answer. That would be fine.
All right. So any of our speakers can answer it.
May I go ahead before Professor Sinderpal Singh, also might wish to share his perspective on this. One is, I don't think that is the case. India continues to be a very active member of G77. That is our constituency. And as you would have noticed, what I mentioned in my presentation and what Prime Minister Modi has been saying in all the addresses that he has made, either at the United Nations or at other multilateral fora, that India's growth, India's rise, India's development, India's prosperity will be used for the benefit of all these countries. So India continues to have an abiding interest and focus as far as as you put it, the oppressed countries of the world is concerned. So that is my response to the question, Simrit. Excellent question. Now, if Madam Moderator Yashasvi and Dr. Oberoi, if you permit, can I just make one or two very quick responses to what Professor Sinderpal Singh said? If it is okay, I will
yes, please go ahead.
Continue now. Yeah, okay.
Yes, please go ahead.
So first of all, let me also add my voice of congratulations and gratitude to Professor Sinderpal Singh for what he has said. And let me say that I completely agree with all that he has said. On Atmanirbharta, Rupinder, you have mentioned about the Indian perspective. But let me also say that I fully recognize and I fully agree with what he has said, that the message Atmanirbharta sends out is one of that makes people outside very concerned, very worried. They are thinking that this is the self-reliance program of the 1960s and the 1970s, when we are constructing tariff walls and non-tariff barriers around ourselves. And we don't want external, whether it is goods or services to come in. I think we have to prove by our actions that it is not so, that it is basically to strengthen ourselves, launch the animal spirits and entrepreneurship so that we become stronger, and then we can interact and we can collaborate in a much more meaningful manner with the outside world. Like there are a couple of cases, as far as the IT sector is concerned, as far as pharmaceuticals is concerned, as far as vaccine manufacturing is concerned, where we have proved our strength, and then we can cooperate and collaborate with others. So I take his point completely, that these are the concerns and we have to satisfy those concerns. Secondly, on globalization, please don't take me wrong. I did not say that globalization is dead. I said globalization is seen to be in decline. And I am a very strong votary of globalization. India is a very strong votary of globalization, because India finds that globalization has helped it. But there are other countries in the world, and you can see that not only in developing countries, where they see that the disparity between the haves and the have-nots has increased, between the rich and the poor has increased, that although the level of poverty has come down, but the disparity has gone up. And also disparity between the rich and the poor nations has gone up. Also, as far as environment is concerned, whether it is in farming, whether it is in mining, globalization to that extent, as far as certain constituencies are concerned, has not been to their benefit. That is what led to the rise of Trump in 2016. That is what has led to Brexit now. But India is definitely not a part of that thinking. India feels we have been able to move about 300 million people over the last 10 years out of poverty into sort of above the poverty line. But globalization has been good for India. And we would like to see that the benefits of globalization reach to all the people, rather than making some people not able to benefit so much. The benefits should get to all of them. So please don't take me wrong that India feels that globalization has not been beneficial. Not at all. I don't think you would have heard the Prime Minister speak any time that globalization has not worked for us. No, it has worked for us. So I think this message should be very, very clear. The other thing is in terms of relations with China. You are right. You know what, China, I think there was no misunderstanding. What I'll say is there was a miscalculation on the part of China. China miscalculated that what they had acted in South China Sea, and they were able to achieve all their objectives without firing a shot, that the same thing would happen as far as India is concerned. That there would be all the psychological warfare, there would all be the information warfare from Global Times, from the People's Daily, from everyone, as to how strong Chinese might and military is, and India will succumb. India refused to succumb. I think that is what the miscalculation is. Another miscalculation, in my view, is China thought that the border issue can be completely separated from from other business, so to say, that other business could proceed as usual and border could be handled as China has been able to do with Vietnam, as China has been able to do with the Philippines. They have been able to sign RCEP, although they have killed Vietnamese fishermen in in the Vietnamese exclusive economic zone. They thought India would also be able to do that. India refuses to buy that. For us, the peace and tranquility on the border is a very integral element of our overall relation with China. And I think right now this message is going to China. The final point that I would like to make is, as far as earlier, we were trying to have an artificial divide between the Quad and the Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific, we said ASEAN centrality is ensured. All of the partners in the Quad, those who have come out either with the ASEAN, with the Indo-Pacific vision or outlook, and you, of course, I'm sure Professor Sinderpal know very well, when Prime Minister Modi spoke at the Shangri-La dialogue on the 1st of June 2018, when he spoke about Indo-Pacific, he did not refer to Quad at all, I guess because of perceived Chinese sensitivities. But right now with this Quad summit, we have tried to bring these, bridge the gap between the Quad and the Indo-Pacific. And in the Indo-Pacific, we say centrality of ASEAN is guaranteed. So whether it is the Indo-Pacific vision of US, of even ASEAN itself, of Japan, of Australia, every one of them mentions ASEAN centrality is guaranteed. But I think ASEAN also really needs to step up to the plate. In addition to sort of, and call out the Chinese aggressive activities as far as South China Sea is concerned and otherwise it is concerned. So let me finish here. And the last comment, maybe, we keep on talking about the decline of USA. I think the reports about the decline of USA, in my view, are far exaggerated. It will continue to be the largest economy for some time. It will continue to be the technology leader. It will continue to be the military leader of the world for a long time to come. So I don't think it is time yet to write off United States as such. It is true that China is rising, but I think, as is said, there is at times many a slip between the cup and the lip. So let us see what the future beholds. Thank you.
Thank you for the insightful response, sir. Next question we have of Kabir. Kabir, could you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Greetings to one and all present. I would first like to thank both the speakers for such an enriching session, to us and our department for organizing such a beautiful session in times of COVID. My question is to both the esteemed speakers. Sir, I would like to ask, how do you see the angle of rare earth metals in the recent strengthening of Quad? Because we have observed that over the years, Chinese have established a kind of monopoly on the future base of technology, which is the rare earth metals. And we have a very good example when in 2011, China almost brought Japan to a standstill by blocking their semiconductor supplies, and US and Australia and Japan are continuously engaging with themselves to means kind of breaking China's monopoly in this sphere, and they see India as a potential destination and a potential contender to do so, as India has quite large reserves of rare earth metals. And secondly, sir, we have seen that technology would be the future determining cause of international relations. But sir, some countries like China are using it as an instrument of coercion and surveillance, like by using their military-backed technology, Hawaii for 5G networks, and their United Front Work Department, which means kind of propagates their ideology all over the world. Sir, do you think that this would bud a fear or suspicion among the poorer countries which are yet to collaborate in tech with the bigger nations, and means keep them marginalized from the overall tech revolution which would be happening in the next few decades? Thank you.
Your question is intended to which speaker, Kabir?
Both the speakers.
All right.
Professor,
Maybe I
maybe you
can.
could take it on. Yeah, please.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, Ambassador. So let me just. I think your question about the rare earths. I think I mean, I think you more or less answered the question yourself. That in a sense, why you asking the question, I think you're answering it. The sense that I think the competition of, I mean, the rare earth is tied to a lot of the kind of technological improvements that are happening around us, right? So the material, the raw material is going to be a site of competition. And then, like you say, I think India is one of those places which is a site for where raw materials are or rare earths are. So I think that is fine. Your second question, I think, slightly more interesting, which is the technology and how I think, I mean, let's get one thing out of the way. Every state will use technology in its interest. There are no state that's going to be, help other people at the expense of itself, right? And the Chinese are doing it, and the Americans have done it before, obviously. I think that the point about the 5G, there was a point where I think people thought that the competition will happen in on diplomatic, political, and even with the BRI on an economic level. But everything else, there was enough transmission, or at least enough sharing of some amount of technology knowledge that won't become a side of competition. I think that's changing now, and you can see it by the whole debate about first 5G and the debate about vaccines, right? So countries like, I give you an example, my country, for example, Singapore, is stuck in the sense that, China produces a vaccine. Now, the utility of their vaccine is yet to be confirmed by medical experts, according to our country's own protocols. But if you don't accept the vaccine also, right, then you got a problem, right? Because then you offend Beijing. So even when it comes to something like a vaccine, we're not even talking 5G, because we had our own 5G issues here, where I think in the end, it was decided that a non-Chinese company provider will be taken. And we had to explain that. I don't know. I mean, you don't normally have to explain these things, but we had to explain it. Say, oh, we're not taking a non-Chinese company, not because we're opposed to, or we think that the Chinese company is going to put something in the 5G to monitor our networks. We have to make that statement. The fact that you now have to make that statement talks about how problematic these technologies have become. It's not only about choosing. Whatever you choose will have implications. And even if you're choosing on the basis of non-political reasons, say you're choosing on the basis of what is the best system that fits my, national network, even a decision based on logic or the best kind of scientific basis cannot just remain by itself. You have to go out and explain. Because if you took the Chinese one, then you got to explain to the Americans and the Europeans why you took. So I think it's going to be, that is a very interesting side of competition. I don't know whether I really answer your question, but it's a very good question. And I think it's, that is how I see it, how I see it playing out at the moment. Maybe Ambassador can add a few words.
Maybe just a few words. And that is, also to respond to Kabir, your first question about rare earths. You're right that China has very significant reserves of rare earths. India, unfortunately, does not have significant, in any finite quantities, rare earths. The countries which do have good quantities are Australia, Afghanistan, and that is why people say that, China is getting into Afghanistan because it will be able to corner, further reserves of rare earths, Africa and Latin America. So these are the countries. Now, I think the question mark you mentioned, of course, in the past, in 2011, when China had tried to weaponize its control and deny them to Japan. That is a real incident that occurred. And I think what has really made other countries wary and uncomfortable and concerned is the fact that during the time of the pandemic, China has also tried to weaponize its supplies of medical equipments and medicines and items like ventilators and PPE kits and masks and other things which other countries needed. And there was some threat, there was some coercion that either you stop talking about China being the source of the virus, otherwise these items are not going to be supplied to you. So, this weaponization of supply chains, that has also come as a huge setback and shock to many peoples. Those which thought that, these supply chains will continue to move seamlessly, that unfortunately faith and belief has been shattered. For instance, India depends to the tune of about 70 to 80% of its APIs, for pharmaceutical products, advanced pharmaceutical ingredients on China. You'd be surprised that as far as the United States is concerned, some antibiotics, it was dependent to the tune of 97% on China. And China was sitting there on them and controlling them, saying that they will not allow them to be shipped to the United States. When Mr. Trump was going, from the rooftops, he was calling this virus the China virus. So all these things have tended to reduce the trustworthiness and the credibility of the supply chains in China. And that is why people are talking about resilient supply chains, trustworthy supply chains. And that is why in one of the statements, Prime Minister Modi had also said that the most important factor in doing business and trade is trust. And if trust is shattered once, then it is going to be very difficult to repair it. So that is one aspect about supply chains in general, which is also relevant as far as rare earths is concerned. So I think the other countries, when there's talk about this D10, when the G7 meet takes place in Cornwall in UK in June, that time how these democratic countries can get together and look at some of these technologies, what was mentioned about emergent technologies and what, Professor Sinderpal Singh very well explained about the use of these new technologies. And, what the United States had mentioned about Huawei and 5G, that this technology is used to spy on other countries. And as he said very rightly, other countries which have these technologies, they will try to advance and promote their own national interests. But as far as China is concerned, if its attempt is to control the other countries, then it becomes a very serious matter. And we have seen how there have been reported cyber attacks against Indian power generation equipment in Mumbai. There was a blackout that took place, and it was said that there was a cyber attack by Chinese company on India. We've heard about these cyber attacks on Australia, on the United States. So I think all these issues raise a lot of concern. And what you said very rightly, that this technology is used for face recognition that has happened in Xinjiang. And that is how the Uyghur Muslims are identified in terms of the protests and demonstrations, and action is taken. Now, the same technology is apparently being used even in Central Asian countries, in Kyrgyzstan, in Kazakhstan, because many of those countries at times have demonstrations against China because their nationals are in Xinjiang, and their families are also incarcerated or put in these so-called education centers or the concentration camps, as people say. So I think it's a very complex subject, and that is why countries have to tread with great caution, because at one place you have a good technology available to you at reasonable cost. But then going forward, your whole system becomes totally dependent upon that particular country and that technology. If that private company was independent, maybe it would not have made all the difference. But Chinese private companies also have a very intimate and a very fuzzy relationship with the government and with the Chinese Communist Party. So I think these are aspects that make people very worried. You have UK, which has said that no further Huawei or 5G. Australia has said we are not going to buy Huawei 5G, and many other countries are also joining. But I think these developed countries have that wherewithal that they can try to develop their own technologies. For developing countries, these choices at times become very difficult. And that is why at the last meeting in Quad, they have said these 4 countries and other, maybe Quad Plus, will come together to develop the emergent technologies and make them available to developing countries without any of such strings attached. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I think it answers the question very well. Next question we'll take of IL Jamir. Could you please unmute yourself and ask your question? And the question is intended to Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar, as mentioned.
In regard to the current Myanmar political issue, some members of the Zo ethnic group are requesting asylum in India, especially highlighted in the case of a police officer who refused to shoot civilians and now entered India in escape of the junta. In Mizoram, where the Zo ethnic group has a majority, the Chief Minister Zoramthanga has appealed for Burmese Zo people for political asylum in India. But the GOI and the Mizoram government are at odds against influx of refugees. What are your comments?
My comments are, I think it's an excellent question. My comments are that both the state government and the central government have to have a heart-to-heart dialogue, have to have a very frank conversation. Let's be clear about 2 things. Number 1 is that when it comes to the determination of the foreign policy of the country, it is the central government which has the last word. That having been said, it has also to take the state governments along with it, those who are affected. For example, you saw as far as the Teesta water issue is concerned, the West Bengal government of Mamata Banerjee has had really a veto on that, whether we can go forward or not. You would remember I referred to the land boundary agreement signed between India and Bangladesh in 1975. And the state governments, West Bengal, Tripura, etc., they really had a veto on that. And it was only after Mr. Modi came to power in 2014 that he was able to get all the state government to come on the same page, to come on the same wavelength and have it passed unanimously through the parliament. You know about our western border, the political parties in Jammu and Kashmir, in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, they want a dialogue with Pakistan. The position of the central government is that talks and terror cannot go together. The point I'm making is decision making is with the central government, but there has to be a dialogue between state and center. Last point in this is India has always provided refuge and asylum to communities that have been oppressed outside the country. You see the Tibetans, 1959, His Holiness Dalai Lama came. They have been given to a place to establish their own central Tibetan administration in Dharamsala. You look through the history, when the Jews were persecuted, they came here. When the Zoroastrians were persecuted, they came here. Whichever communities globally have been persecuted, they have come to India, they have found a positive home here, they have blossomed, they have flourished, they have prospered. So I think as far as, and we have had Rohingyas in India earlier also, but these people who are coming, at this time, they are not Rohingyas really. They are ordinary Myanmar people, maybe from other tribes. But whatever that might be, meaning I don't want to go into the substantive elements of this, but India has always provided refuge to people who have been persecuted in their homelands. That should be done, but after a full, detailed, frank conversation between the central and the state government. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Now, due to shortage of time, we'll be taking up the last question for the day. राम प्रकाश, आपसे निवेदन है कि आप प्लीज अपने आप को अनम्यूट करके अपना प्रश्न पूछें।
धन्यवाद यशस्वी। अब मेरा प्रश्न अशोक सर से है कि सर, वर्तमान समय में चीन और भारत के बीच बढ़ती नजदीकी का भारत पर क्या प्रभाव, चीन और रूस के बीच बढ़ती नजदीकी का भारत पर क्या प्रभाव पड़ेगा? क्योंकि पिछले कुछ वर्षों में विशेषकर मोदी रिजिम में हमारा झुकाव अमेरिका की तरफ ज्यादा रहा है। और दूसरा प्रश्न है कि सर, क्या हमारी विदेश नीति में रूस की जो महत्ता रही है उसमें कमी आई है या उसका स्थान अमेरिका ने ले लिया है?
धन्यवाद राम प्रकाश, आपका प्रश्न दोनों प्रश्न जो है आपके बहुत अच्छे हैं। तो प्रोफेसर सिंदरपाल, इज इट ओके इफ आई रिस्पॉन्ड इन हिंदी? आप हिंदी से अच्छी तरह समझते हैं? और जी, तो मैं हिंदी में ही इसका उत्तर देने का प्रयास करूंगा। देखिए, आपका पहला जो प्रश्न है, जो रूस और चीन के बीच में जो नजदीकी बढ़ रही है, तो उससे भारत के ऊपर क्या प्रभाव पड़ेगा, इसका जिक्र मैंने अपना जो प्रेजेंटेशन है उसमें भी मैंने थोड़ा सा ये किया था। अब रूस और चीन के बीच की जो नजदीकी है, मैंने जैसे बताया, वो 2014 के बाद शुरुआत हुई इसकी ज्यादा तरीके से, क्योंकि तब सैंक्शंस लगाए गए रूस के ऊपर अमेरिका और पश्चिमी देशों ने, क्योंकि वहां पर जो यूक्रेन में इन्होंने दखलंदाजी की, वहां पर क्राइमिया में उन्होंने रेफरेंडम किया और क्राइमिया में रेफरेंडम के बाद उसको अपने साथ रूस में मिला लिया, तो इसकी वजह से उनके ऊपर सैंक्शंस बहुत पड़े। और दूसरी बात है, जब 2016 में ये कहा गया, जो उन्होंने रूस ने दखलंदाजी की है अमेरिका के जो इलेक्शंस हुए हैं, तो राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप के हित में उन्होंने दखलंदाजी की है, तो इसीलिए उनके विरुद्ध सैंक्शंस लगाए जाएं। तो ये जैसे कहा जाए, रूस को धकेल दिया गया है चीन के साथ, चीन के आगोश में, चीन के साथ उनके संबंधों को और अच्छा करने के लिए। राष्ट्रपति ट्रंप ने बहुत प्रयास किया जो वो रूस के साथ कुछ ना कुछ अपने संबंधों को बेहतर बनाए, परंतु वो उसमें सफल नहीं हुए, क्योंकि कांग्रेस ने उनको इजाजत नहीं दी। तो इसीलिए अब हमको अपने जो संबंध हैं और हमारे बहुत अच्छे, जिसको हम कहते हैं स्पेशल एंड प्रिविलेज स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप है हमारा रूस के साथ 2010 से, उसको हम बरकरार रखना चाहते हैं। और भारत की तरफ से लगातार इसका प्रयास किया जा रहा है। आपको मालूम होगा, जो अभी अभी हमारे विदेश सचिव हर्षवर्धन श्रृंगला वहां पर गए थे, रूस में गए थे, सबसे उन्होंने मुलाकात की। अपने संबंधों को आगे ले जाने में हम बहुत प्रयास कर रहे हैं। हालांकि अमेरिका ने कहा है, जो वो भारत के ऊपर, अगर भारत S-400 मिसाइल सिस्टम रूस से लेता है तो हमारे ऊपर सैंक्शंस लगा देंगे, परंतु इसको हमने दरकिनार कर दिया है, नजरअंदाज कर दिया है उनकी इस धमकी को, और हम वहां से S-400 इंपोर्ट कर रहे हैं, आयात कर रहे हैं, क्योंकि हम अपनी स्ट्रेटेजिक ऑटोनॉमी इसमें बनाकर रखना चाहते हैं। जो हमारे हित है उसमें हम अपना काम करते रहेंगे। तो इसीलिए मैं कहूंगा ये भारत के लिए चुनौती है, परंतु दोनों को रूस अपने हितों की वजह से चीन के पास जा रहा है, और रूस अपने हितों की वजह से पाकिस्तान के साथ अपने संबंध और अच्छे कर रहा है, क्योंकि उसको वहां पर अफगानिस्तान में वो तालिबान के साथ कुछ अपने संबंधों को बेहतर बनाना चाहता है। तो जैसे मैंने कहा, चुनौती है यकीनन, परंतु मुझे पूरा विश्वास है जो हम अपने संबंधों को मजबूत रखने में और आगे ले जाने में, इसमें हमें कामयाबी मिलेगी, हम सफल रहेंगे। दूसरा आपका प्रश्न था, जो क्या हम जो मोदी सरकार के आने के बाद हमारी नजदीकी अमेरिका के साथ ज्यादा हुई है। देखिए, मैं आपको बताना चाहूंगा, अमेरिका के साथ जो हमारी नजदीकी है वो अपने हितों को लेकर हुई है, वो किसी सरकार के ऊपर ऐसी इतना वो निर्भर नहीं है। जो असल में जो पहला कदम उठाया गया था 2005 में, जिसे कहा जाता है फ्रेमवर्क एग्रीमेंट, यूएस इंडिया न्यूक्लियर डील, वो जुलाई 2005 में जब मनमोहन सिंह की सरकार थी, तब वहां पर उसके ऊपर हस्ताक्षर किए गए थे। 2008 में ये वाला जो समझौता है, इंडिया यूएस न्यूक्लियर डील, उसके ऊपर दस्तखत किए गए थे। 2008 में ही जब इंटरनेशनल एटॉमिक एनर्जी एजेंसी में हमें यूनिक वेवर मिला था, तब मनमोहन सिंह की सरकार थी। तो इसलिए ये कहना ठीक नहीं होगा जो केवल प्रधानमंत्री मोदी उसको ने ये काम किया है भारत और अमेरिका के रिश्तों को सुदृढ़ करने में। ये शुरुआत से चली आ रही है। जैसे प्रोफेसर सिंदरपाल सिंह ने बिल्कुल ठीक कहा, जो काफी हद तक इसमें कंटिन्यूटी है। इसमें ये शुरुआत किसी ने की, परंतु अपने हितों को देखते हुए हम इसको आगे लेकर जा रहे हैं। ये मैं आपकी बात मानूंगा, जो 2010 से लेकर 2014 तक एक शिथिलता आ गई थी, एक लेथार्जी आ गई थी भारत और अमेरिका के रिश्तों में। उसको जब प्रधानमंत्री मोदी 2014 में आए तो उन्होंने उसको आगे तेजी दिखाई। उन्होंने 2015 में राष्ट्रपति ओबामा को, पहले अमेरिका के राष्ट्रपति थे जिन्होंने हमारे यहाँ पर चीफ गेस्ट के तौर पर आए हमारे रिपब्लिक डे सेलिब्रेशंस पर, और बहुत सारे हमने आगे काम किए। और जैसे आपको याद होगा, जो उन्होंने कहा था प्रधानमंत्री मोदी जब 2016 में गए थे यूएस के कांग्रेस के जॉइंट सेशन को, उन्होंने कहा था जो वी हैव ओवरकम द हेसिटेशंस ऑफ हिस्ट्री। मतलब हमने देखा है जो हमें अपने हितों के लिए चाहिए, जो हमें टेक्नोलॉजी चाहिए, जो कैपिटल चाहिए, जो हमें सपोर्ट चाहिए। आपको ये भी मालूम है, जो जब चीन के साथ हमारा मुकाबला हो रहा था गलवान में, तो उस समय इंटेलिजेंस, जियोस्पेशियल इंफॉर्मेशन, वो बहुत ज्यादा हमको अमेरिका से मिला था। तो इसीलिए अमेरिका अपने हितों को आगे ले जाने के लिए अमेरिका हमारा साथ देता है, इसीलिए हम अमेरिका के साथ अपने संबंध बढ़ाते हैं। ये किसी एक व्यक्ति के ऊपर निर्भर नहीं है, ये देश के हितों पर निर्भर है, जो कैसे हम उन हितों को आगे लेकर जाएंगे। और एक आखिरी जो कमेंट मैं करना चाहूंगा प्रोफेसर ओबरॉय आपकी इजाजत से, वो है आरसेप के बारे में। जब प्रोफेसर सिंदरपाल सिंह ने कहा हमारा मूवमेंट आरसेप से बाहर, मे बी इट इज अ इंडिकेशन जो हम ग्लोबलाइजेशन से बाहर जा रहे हैं, नहीं, ये है, इट इज बेसिकली अ रिस्पॉन्स to the fact that China is a part of RCEP. Even without an FTA, India has a $60 billion trade deficit with China. We export $15 billion, we import $75 billion. So if without an FTA, we have a $60 billion trade deficit, with an FTA, our manufacturing would be very severely adversely impacted. That was the reason that we decided to stay out of RCEP, although we had negotiated very seriously, in good faith and sincerely in the RCEP talks from 2013 onwards, when we joined this RCEP. Sorry, so with these a few words, thank you very much.
थैंक यू सर। भारत चीन पर उल्लेखनीय प्रतिक्रिया के लिए आपका बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। Now, as we come towards the end of the session, I would like to invite Pankuri Jain, President of La Politique, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Yashasvi. So as we come towards the end of our Frank Thakurdas Memorial Lecture 2, I, Pankuri Jain, on behalf of La Politique, Department of Political Science, Kirori Mal College, University of Delhi, would like to extend our deepest gratitude to our esteemed guest of honor, Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar ji and Professor Sinderpal Singh ji, for enlightening us with their knowledge and words of wisdom and delivering such an insightful and thought-provoking session on reimagining India's role in the world. I would also like to thank our staff advisor, Dr. Rupinder Oberoi ma'am, for her support and guidance, and all the other professors for joining us today. And special thanks to the organizing committee for organizing and making all the arrangements. And big thanks to the participants for making the session more interactive and insightful and engaging. And once again, I thank the guest speakers. We are truly inspired by your great words, sir. Thank you.